kind of, I love your social media and kind of what you're doing on Twitter and LinkedIn. Kind of, what have your experiences been with social media, and how has that kind of helped you kind of get business and kind of, lobby as well?
So that's another really good question. Okay, so I am a Gen Xer, and I will tell you, I wasn't born with a phone in my hand. The whole video thing does not come naturally. It has been an experience to realize, okay, well, if people aren't going to see you in person, they need to see you. So, you got to get over whatever self-consciousness is there and just put yourself out there and be okay with it. So I definitely went from like 0 to 60 on being like, okay, like don't necessarily know exactly what I'm doing here, but I'm going to just put myself out there and I know what my message is, and I'm just going to try to communicate it. So one of the things that I started doing, which has been one of those really like positive, didn't see it coming, but it has been working really well, is I just started doing these free advocacy webinars, like trainings really for any activist group, honestly, anybody who wants to, but mostly targeting grassroots community groups, non-Sacramento folks, right? Like the people who are not working for organizations that can hire a consultant like me, but who could really stand to benefit from this information. So I started doing these webinars, again, just sort of like, okay, let's see how this works. And, how to lobby, how the legislative process works, how to talk to a legislator, what not to tell them. Like, we had this excellent one with Assemblymember Kalra, where he said, don't lobby me on my own bills. Like, stuff that like, it sounds perfectly like, of course, but, maybe if it's not like someone didn't tell you that, you wouldn't necessarily know that to be true. And so the webinars have become this really great way to do a community service and to do work that I love doing anyway, which is sharing information, because this shouldn't just be information that only, organizations that have money have access to, but then to be able to meet people, right? And so through the webinars, I've gotten a lot of referrals and a lot of kind of like people who know people, and then that sort of has generated business. And then the other thing, like I said, is just the presence on social media. And one of the things that I'm learning, right, is that when you have value to share with people, like that is what keeps people engaged and following, right? So, I'm transitioning now, like usually my value would be through conversation, because I always did a lot of coalition work, pre-COVID, and tried to sort of like share my sort of expertise as much as I could. Now what I realize is I want to share that expertise online and see who's out there listening. And interestingly enough, I've had people from around the country participate in the webinars. I even had a gentleman from Nigeria, which blew me away. And overall, like, I'm kind of like, well, why are you like, this is very clearly targeting California. And the feedback I'm getting is these are activists around the country, they're around the world, and they're like, we want to know how to do this stuff. And so it's kind of like democratizing the advocacy process, which sounds like sort of like I'm kind of contradicting myself, but there's a lot of, sort of, what's the word, intimidating silence around how the Capitol operates. And I want to start opening that up.
Yeah, that's interesting.
About that, Jared.
Always great to get more information out and have people engage. Kind of now that session's wrapped, kind of what are you going to be working on kind of in the off season, kind of heading into the next session?
Well, I've got a couple webinars that I'm firming up with. So the event with the assembly member went really well, and the feedback that I got was do more with legislators, because what they're doing is telling the perspective as the elected, right? Like, don't when you call my office, don't say this. Like, don't have someone from Texas call me. Like, that's not necessarily going to have the greatest impact, right? So I'm working on a couple other ones that are going to have other legislators as special guests, but like try to kind of hone it into a certain sort of subject area or a theme so that we can kind of get deeper into like the nitty gritty of like, again, like how to be using advocacy better. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm learning a lot about climate advocacy. And because I come out of human services, I am not super knowledgeable about the environmental world, the environmental justice world. So I'm trying to kind of infuse myself into that so that I can figure out who the cast of characters is and hopefully get involved. I'm very passionate right now around climate.
It kind of reminds me of something you touched on earlier is kind of, you might know the committee or the process, but can you kind of talk about, no matter what the subject is, you can advocate for anyone because you know the process. Would you say
That's right? That's right. And in fact, when I first started thinking about doing this, my immediate thought was like, well, my expertise is in human services, right? Like the IHSS program. I worked in that program for 10 years, but my mentor and other folks would be like, people don't care about what you think on policy. They need help navigating the process, right? Like organizations have their policy people. They know what they want. They've flushed all that out. You're not there to help them do that. You're there to help them figure out, how do I communicate this and actually make it come to pass, right? Like there's nothing worse than righteous policy that is not happening because the process is excluding it, right? Like you haven't reached the right kind of tipping point of the politics and the policy to get to somewhere, right? So my sort of thinking, like you just said, is like, how do you navigate this complicated system? I mean, and here's the other thing, like the budget. A lot of folks don't realize that lobbying the budget is completely different than lobbying a policy bill, right?
Exactly.
And you may have done 1,000 policy bills. That means that doesn't mean you know how to get funding in the budget. And so again, like breaking down and the other thing with budget advocacy is it's not necessarily spelled out anywhere. Like, here's how you do it. Like, here's, you get an author and then you go to a policy committee. Like, that's not necessarily super obvious when it comes to budget. So that's the type of expertise too, where you're like, okay, so, you start here and you take these steps. And it's really just saving time and resources, because maybe if you did it on your own, it would have taken you 10 years or 5 years to get to success. And instead cutting out a lot of the, mistakes that maybe could have been avoided and getting there a lot faster.
Hi, and welcome to Sacktown Talks. Thank you so much for watching our content. If you like it, make sure to hit that like button, and please make sure to subscribe.